The chill of the night air bit through the thin fabric of my tunic as we marched silently through the hills. The darkness shrouded our movements, and the only sounds were the muffled clinks of armor and the soft footfalls on the rocky path. We had left Navarrete hours ago, taking a roundabout route to catch Henry of Trastámara's forces by surprise. The tension was palpable. Every soldier knew the importance of this dawn attack. As the first light of dawn began to pierce the horizon, the hill ahead of us became visible, a looming shadow against the pale sky. We crested the hill, and there it was Henry's army, facing east towards Navarrete, unaware of the danger lurking from the northeast. My heart pounded in my chest as we descended the hill in silence, every step bringing us closer to the unsuspecting enemy. The moment we reached the bottom, the signal was given, and with a thunderous roar, we charged. The element of surprise worked in our favor. Henry's troops, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. I could see the confusion on their faces, the frantic shouts of commanders trying to restore order. Among them, Bertrand du Guesclin, a formidable opponent, swiftly maneuvered the vanguard to confront us. Our lines collided with a deafening crash. Spears splintered, and the clash of steel filled the air. Du Guesclin's men fought fiercely, their initial shock giving way to desperation. But amid the chaos, I noticed some of their horsemen defecting to our side, followed by a larger group of infantry. Panic spread through Henry's ranks, confusion running amok. Du Guesclin, seeing the disarray, abandoned his defensive stance and ordered a charge with his vanguard. They were the best troops, hardened veterans and French free companies. The impact was brutal. Our vanguard, led by the Duke of Lancaster and John Chandos, was forced back. We were so close to the enemy that spears became useless. Swords, axes, and daggers were drawn, and the battle turned into a bloody melee. The air was thick with the sounds of battle shouts of command, cries of the wounded, the clang of weapons. My arm ached from the constant swings of my sword. Blood splattered my face, the coppery taste mixing with the sweat on my lips. Every step was a struggle through the mud, the bodies, and the chaos. On the flanks, our elite Gascon mercenaries pressed forward, encircling Du Guesclin's vanguard. I saw the Castilian-like cavalry of Don Tello attempting to counter our flanking maneuver. They rode hard, but as they approached, a volley of arrows from our archers rained down upon them. Without adequate protection, they were decimated, forced to retreat in disarray. Henry himself charged against the Gascons, trying desperately to turn the tide. Again and again he led his cavalry in assaults, but our archers were relentless. Horses fell, riders were unseated, and the ground was littered with the dead and dying. The pride of the Castilian cavalry was shattered, and fighting on foot was out of the question for them. It was considered a humiliation. With the flanking maneuver complete, our Gascon mercenaries crushed Du Guesclin's vanguard. The main body of Henry's army, which had barely engaged, began to flee. The sight was both exhilarating and horrifying. Soldiers ran towards the bridge of Nájera, desperate to escape. Henry's harangues fell on deaf ears as his men ignored him, panic driving them into a frantic retreat. The Aragonese cavalry of Jaime, the 4th of Majorca, gave chase, cutting down the fleeing soldiers as they became trapped by the river and the narrow bridge. The slaughter was unimaginable. The cries of the dying filled the air, and the river ran red with blood. Henry's army, now a disorganized mob, suffered the vast majority of their losses in these final, desperate moments. As the battle wound down, we pursued those who had taken refuge in Nájera. The town, unprepared for our fury, fell quickly. We pillaged without mercy, driven by the bloodlust of battle and the desire for spoils. The streets were strewn with bodies, the homes looted, and the town itself burned in places. The aftermath was a scene of utter devastation, a stark testament to the horrors of war. The sun was high in the sky by the time the last of the resistance was quelled. I stood amidst the ruins, breathing heavily, my body aching from the exertion, my mind numb from the violence. The Battle of Nájera was over, and we had emerged victorious, but the cost was etched into every blood-soaked inch of the battlefield. The Black Prince's banner fluttered in the breeze, a symbol of our triumph. But as I looked around at the destruction, the dead and dying, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow. War was a brutal, unforgiving master, and today we had paid its price in full. As the adrenaline of battle ebbed away, the aftermath of our victory began to sink in. The stench of blood and smoke filled the air, mingling with the cries of the wounded and the dying. Our commanders moved among the troops, organising the cleanup and tending to the injured. I found myself standing beside John Chandos, both of us catching our breath after the grueling fight. "Well fought," Chandos said, clapping me on the shoulder. His face, like mine, was smeared with grime and blood, his eyes hard but alive with the light of victory. "Thank you, sir," I replied, nodding. It was a close thing for a moment there. "Aye," he agreed, looking out over the battlefield. "But we held. And now we've secured a significant advantage for the Prince." The Black Prince himself, Edward, moved through the ranks, offering words of encouragement and praise. His presence was a beacon of strength and determination. He paused near us, his armour gleaming despite the stains of combat. "Chandos, a word," he called, and my commander moved to join him. I took the opportunity to survey the field, taking in the scope of our victory. Bodies lay strewn across the ground, both friend and foe. The dead and dying Castilians were intermingled with our fallen comrades, a grim reminder of the cost of war. Our medics moved among them, offering what aid they could, but the toll was heavy. Nearby, a group of prisoners was being gathered. Among them, I recognized several high-ranking Castilian officers. They stood with heads bowed, their defeat palpable in their dejected postures. Our victory had not only decimated Henry's forces, but also captured many of his key supporters. As the day wore on, the task of clearing the battlefield continued. I joined my fellow soldiers in this grim work, searching for survivors and offering what comfort we could. Each body we turned over was a potential friend, a comrade lost in the chaos of battle. The pain of loss was a familiar ache, one that I had learned to live with, but never to accept. By evening, the battlefield had been largely cleared. Fires burned in the distance as we disposed of the dead, the pyres casting long shadows in the fading light. Exhausted, I found a quiet spot to rest, my mind replaying the events of the day. The exhilaration of victory was tempered by the knowledge of the lives lost and the suffering endured. Chandos joined me, sitting heavily on a nearby rock. He handed me a flask, and I took a grateful swig, the strong liquor burning a path down my throat. "To those who didn't make it," he said, raising the flask in a solemn toast. I nodded, echoing his sentiment. "To those who didn't make it," I repeated, feeling the weight of each fallen comrade's sacrifice. We sat in silence for a while, watching as the pyres burned and the stars began to appear in the night sky. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Henry of Trastámara was still at large, and the conflict would continue. But for tonight, we allowed ourselves a moment of respite, a brief pause in the relentless march of war. Dawn broke over a changed landscape. The battlefield, once a scene of chaos and bloodshed, was now eerily quiet. The smoke from the pyres had dissipated, leaving only the charred remains of the dead. The air was cool, a stark contrast to the heat and fury of the previous day. We assembled at the camp where the Black Prince addressed us. His voice carried over the stillness, firm and resolute. "Yesterday we achieved a great victory," he began. "But let us not forget the price paid by those who fell. We honour their sacrifice by continuing to fight for our cause. Henry of Trastámara has been dealt a severe blow, but he is not defeated. We must remain vigilant and prepared for the battles yet to come." A murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks. The camaraderie forged in the heat of battle was strong, and we drew strength from each other. The Black Prince's words were a rallying cry, a reminder of the larger purpose behind our struggle. As the day wore on, we began preparations for our next move. Scouts were sent out to gather intelligence on Henry's whereabouts, and our commanders met to plan our strategy. The victory at Nájera had given us momentum, but we knew that Henry would not rest until he had reclaimed his throne. In the days that followed, we remained in Nájera, consolidating our position and preparing for the next phase of the campaign. The town, now under our control, became a hub of activity. Supplies were gathered and our forces were replenished. The wounded were tended to, and the dead were honoured with proper burials. Amid the hustle and bustle, I found moments of quiet reflection. The faces of those who had fallen haunted my thoughts, a constant reminder of the cost of war. But there was also a sense of purpose, a determination to see this conflict through to the end. One evening, as I walked through the town, I came across a group of children playing in the street. Their laughter was a stark contrast to the grim reality of our situation. I watched them for a moment, their innocence a poignant reminder of what we were fighting for. It was for them, for their future, that we endured the horrors of battle. As I turned to leave, one of the children ran up to me, a small boy with wide eyes and a gap-toothed smile. He looked up at me with a mix of awe and curiosity. "Are you a knight?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. I smiled, kneeling down to his level. "Yes, I am," I replied. "And what is your name, young one?" "Pedro," he said proudly. "Well, Pedro," I said, ruffling his hair, "remember that bravery comes in many forms. It's not just about fighting battles, but about standing up for what is right." He nodded solemnly, his eyes shining with admiration. As I walked away, I felt a renewed sense of resolve. The battles ahead would be tough, but we would face them with courage and honor. For Pedro, and for all those who looked to us for protection, we would continue to fight. The road ahead was uncertain, but we would walk it with our heads held high, guided by the spirit of those who had gone before us. The Battle of Nájera was a testament to our strength and determination, and it was only the beginning of our journey. Our scouts returned with news of Henry's movements. He had retreated to regroup, gathering his remaining forces and seeking support from his allies. The Black Prince called a council of war, and we gathered in the makeshift headquarters, a dimly lit room in one of Nájera's larger houses. Edward stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding respect. Beside him were the Duke of Lancaster, John Chandos, and other key commanders. Maps were spread out before us, detailing the terrain and the positions of our forces. "Henry is a wounded animal," Edward began, his voice steady. "He will strike back with all the ferocity he can muster. We must be prepared to meet him head-on." Chandos leaned forward, tracing a path on the map with his finger. "He's likely to head towards Burgos, seeking to fortify his position there. We should cut him off before he can regroup." The Duke of Lancaster nodded in agreement. "We need to maintain the pressure. A decisive blow now could end this conflict." Plans were laid, strategies debated. We discussed troop movements, supply lines, and potential engagement points. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of urgency and determination. Every detail was scrutinized, every possibility considered. As the meeting drew to a close, Edward looked around the room, his gaze settling on each of us in turn. "We have come this far because of our unity and our resolve. Let us continue to stand together, and we will emerge victorious." With our plans set, we prepared to march. The men were in high spirits, buoyed by our recent victory and the promise of further success. The dawn of our departure was crisp and clear, a good omen for the journey ahead. We moved swiftly, our columns winding through the countryside. The land was beautiful, a patchwork of fields and forests dotted with villages, but the spectre of war loomed over everything, a reminder of the conflict that had torn this land apart. As we marched, I found myself alongside Thomas, a fellow soldier and friend. He was a sturdy man with a quick wit and a ready smile, even in the midst of battle. "Do you think we'll catch Henry this time?" he asked, his tone half joking but laced with genuine curiosity. "If the prince has anything to say about it, we will," I replied, matching his pace. "He's determined to see this through." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Aye, and so are we, for all the Pedros out there." His words struck a chord with me. The memory of the boy in Nájera was fresh in my mind. We marched not just for glory or for the Black Prince, but for the people of this land, for their right to live in peace and safety. Our intelligence proved accurate. Henry had indeed headed towards Burgos, seeking to fortify his position there. We arrived to find his forces entrenched, ready for a fight. The tension was palpable as we prepared for battle, our men eager but wary of the challenge ahead. The morning of the battle dawned cold and clear. The Black Prince addressed us, his voice carrying across the ranks. "Today we face a formidable foe, but remember, we fight not just for ourselves, but for the future of this land. Let us show them the strength and courage of our cause." The battle began with a thunderous clash. Our archers took their positions, raining arrows down upon the enemy. The front lines surged forward, meeting Henry's troops with a roar. Swords clashed, shields splintered, and the air was thick with the sounds of combat. I found myself in the thick of it, my sword an extension of my will. The chaos of battle was all-encompassing, a blur of movement and sound. Every swing, every block was a struggle for survival. The enemy was relentless, their determination matching our own. At the height of the battle, I saw Henry himself rallying his men. He was a striking figure, his armour gleaming, his voice a rallying cry. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw the fire of his resolve. He would not go down easily, but neither would we. The Black Prince's strategy began to unfold. Our flanking manoeuvres, led by the elite Gascon mercenaries, began to press the enemy from the sides. The pressure mounted, and the Castilian lines began to waver. Henry fought fiercely, but the tide was turning. Our forces pressed forward with renewed vigour, driving the enemy back. The field was a maelstrom of bodies and blood, but our resolve never wavered. In the end, it was our unity and strategy that prevailed. Henry's forces began to break, their retreat turning into a rout. We pursued them relentlessly, cutting down those who fled. The battle was won, but the cost was steep. The sun set on another victorious but blood-soaked day. The field was littered with the fallen, the wounded moaning in pain. We tended to our own and gave what aid we could to the enemy wounded, a small act of mercy in the midst of brutality. The Black Prince surveyed the field, his expression grim but resolute. We have achieved another victory, but the war is not yet over. We must remain vigilant and continue to press our advantage. As we began the sombre task of burying the dead and tending to the living, I found a moment of quiet reflection. The faces of those we had lost were etched into my memory, a constant reminder of the cost of war. But there was also a sense of purpose, a belief in the cause for which we fought. The battles ahead would be difficult, but we would face them with courage and unity. For the people of this land, for the future we sought to secure, we would continue to fight. The journey ahead was long, but we walked it with determination, guided by the spirit of those who had gone before us. The Battle of Nájera had been a turning point, a testament to our strength and resolve, and as we marched forward, we carried with us the hope of a brighter future. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The Black Prince, ever the strategist, worked tirelessly to consolidate our gains and plan our next moves. Burgos became our new base of operations, a city buzzing with the energy of a victorious army. In our downtime, I often found myself thinking of home, of the peaceful life that seemed so distant now. Letters from loved ones were a precious connection to that world, a reminder of why we fought. The hope of returning to a land free from the strife that had plagued it for so long was a powerful motivator. One evening, as I sat by the campfire, the Black Prince called for me. I found him in his tent, poring over maps and dispatches. He looked up as I entered, a rare smile on his face. "Sit, my friend," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I wanted to thank you for your service. Your bravery at Nájera and Burgos has not gone unnoticed." I nodded, humbled by his words. "Thank you, my lord. It is an honour to serve." He leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "We have achieved much, but there is still work to be done. Henry is not defeated, and we must remain vigilant. I need men like you, men who understand the stakes and are willing to see this through to the end." "I am with you, my lord," I said firmly. "Whatever comes, I will stand by your side." He nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. "Good. Together we will see this through, for England and for Castile." With our forces replenished and our strategy clear, we prepared for the next phase of our campaign. The Black Prince's plan was audacious, a bold strike aimed at breaking Henry's remaining power and securing a decisive victory. We marched with purpose, the memory of our victories driving us forward. The land was beautiful in its springtime bloom, a stark contrast to the horrors of war. But the shadow of conflict loomed ever large, a reminder of the task that lay ahead. Our scouts brought news of Henry's position, and we moved swiftly to engage. The battle that ensued was fierce, a brutal clash of wills and steel, but our resolve never wavered, and our unity carried us through. In the end, it was our strategy and determination that prevailed. Henry's forces were broken, his power shattered. The road to peace was still long, but the path was now clearer. As we stood on the battlefield, the taste of victory fresh in our mouths, I felt a sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it seemed within reach. With Henry's defeat, the campaign drew to a close. The Black Prince began the process of returning to England, his mission accomplished. We left behind a land scarred by war, but hopeful for a brighter future. The journey home was bittersweet. We had won, but at great cost. The faces of fallen comrades haunted my dreams, a constant reminder of the price of victory. But there was also a sense of relief, a feeling that the worst was behind us. As the shores of England came into view, a cheer rose from our ranks. Home. The word carried with it a promise of peace, of a life free from the horrors of war. We disembarked, greeted by loved ones and the promise of a new beginning. The Black Prince, ever the leader, addressed us one final time. We have achieved much, but let us not forget those who have fallen. Their sacrifice has brought us to this moment. Let us honour them by striving for a future of peace and prosperity. His words were met with a resounding cheer. We had come through the fire, and now we stood ready to build a new future. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had forged us into something stronger, something better. As I looked out over the crowd, I felt a sense of pride and hope. The road ahead would not be easy, but we would walk it together, guided by the lessons of the past and the promise of the future. For the Black Prince, for England, and for the hope of a brighter tomorrow, we would face whatever came next with courage and determination. The Battle of Nájera was behind us, but its lessons would guide us for years to come.